Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Marcus Sullivan, and I've been a ranger at Olympic National Park in Washington for 23 years. What I'm about to tell you happened in October 2009, 3 months after my daughter Emma's funeral. 3 months after the world stopped making sense. People always ask why I keep working in these woods after what happened. The truth is, some stories need to be told, even when nobody wants to believe them. Especially when nobody wants to believe them. Sweat trickled down my forehead despite the October temperature hovering around 39 degrees. My shoulders kept climbing toward my ears at every forest sound, like my body was preparing for a fight my mind didn't understand yet. I'd been searching for Megan Foster for 6 hours. 6 hours since she'd vanished during a solo hike on the ancient Cedars Trail. My Garmin eTrex GPS showed coordinates 47 degree 49, 203N, 123 degree 30, 17W. I knew every tree, every rock, every creek within a 15-mile radius, but the forest felt different today. Shadows fell at wrong angles. The smell of decomposition was stronger than normal, mixed with something that reminded me vaguely of stage powder, that talcum with the sickly sweet scent Emma used in her school plays. Emma. I forced my thoughts back to Megan Foster, 24 years old, brown hair, last seen wearing a red North Face backpack and Merrell boots. She'd started the trail at 11:30 a.m., should have been back by 3 p.m. Base, this is Sullivan, code 1023, north sector of Ancient Cedars Trail. My voice sounded hoarse on the Motorola radio. Static answered with interference that almost formed whispers. Copy, Sullivan. Any sign of the victim? Negative. Found tracks in the mud near mile marker 3.2, but they... Stop. Stop literally, as if Megan Foster had simply evaporated. I clipped the radio back to my belt, next to the Maglite flashlight and first aid kit I'd carried for 2 decades. The familiar weight was comforting. At least some things still made sense. That's when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong in the forest. Distant, coming from the west direction where the trees grew denser. Applause. Someone was clapping slowly, rhythmically, like at the end of a theatrical performance. My fingers went numb as I grabbed the .40 caliber from my holster. The tingling sensation crawled up my arms, like when you sleep on your arm wrong and it wakes up. But I hadn't been sleeping, because I recognized that sound. 3 years earlier, in 2006, I'd found a missing hiker in this same area. Benjamin Torres, a retired actor from Seattle. When I located him, he was standing motionless in a clearing, staring at nothing, his lips moving in silent recitation. It took 3 days in the hospital before he stopped screaming about the eternal performance and the director who never says cut. The doctors called it exposure-induced psychosis. I filed my report and tried to forget. But some things don't stay forgotten. The first clue, I followed the applause deeper into the forest, my Danner Acadia boots crunching on wet cedar needles. The GPS signal flickered and died. My radio spat static that sounded increasingly like distant voices arguing over lines in a play. The applause stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard something worse. Singing. A woman's voice, high and clear, echoing off the trees with perfect acoustics that shouldn't exist in open forest. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, something classical I couldn't place. Megan? I called out, my voice swallowed by the woods. Megan Foster, if you can hear me, call out. The singing continued, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. I checked my watch. 1:47 p.m. The sun should have been directly overhead, but the canopy above filtered the light into a dim, greenish twilight that made my stomach clench. My peripheral vision narrowed, like looking through a cardboard tube. A stress response I'd learned to recognize from too many search and rescue operations gone wrong. But this felt different. More intentional. I found the second clue 50 yards ahead. Megan's red backpack, hanging from a Douglas fir branch exactly 8 feet off the ground. No way it could have gotten there naturally. The zipper was open, contents scattered below: water bottle, energy bars, a paperback novel, and a cell phone with a cracked screen. But no blood, no signs of struggle. I documented everything with my digital camera, a Canon PowerShot that Emma had given me for Father's Day. The photos would later show something the naked eye couldn't see in that moment: shadows that didn't match the position of the sun, and what looked like stage lights hanging impossibly in the trees. That's when I found the program. A single sheet of yellowed paper, folded in half, lying next to Megan's phone. The kind of program you get at a small theater production. The cover read, "The Shadow Players present an eternal performance directed by Jay Morrison. No intermission, no exit." Inside, the cast list made my blood turn to ice water. Benjamin Torres, The Wanderer, joined October 2006. Sarah Chen, The Lost Daughter, joined March 2007. David Martinez, The Seeker, joined June 2008. And introducing Megan Foster, The Innocent, joining tonight. At the bottom, in handwriting that looked like it had been penned with a quill, Marcus Sullivan, you are cordially invited to audition for the role of the witness. Break a leg. JM. My hands shook as I folded the program and slipped it into my jacket pocket. The singing had stopped, but now I could hear something else. Footsteps. Multiple sets, walking in perfect synchronization, like a military drill, or actors hitting their marks. They were coming from the direction of the old Morrison homestead. The Morrison place had been abandoned since 1983, when local theater director Jonathan Morrison supposedly died in a house fire. I'd hiked past the ruins dozens of times over the years. Nothing but a crumbling foundation and a stone chimney reaching toward the sky like an accusing finger. But as I pushed through the underbrush toward the property, I could smell wood smoke. And something else that made my throat close up. Grease paint. The metallic taste of fear filled my mouth as I crested the small hill overlooking the homestead. What I saw defied everything I knew about that place. The house stood intact, not rebuilt. The weathered siding and broken shutters looked exactly as they would have in 1983. Warm yellow light spilled from the windows, and smoke drifted from the chimney. On the wraparound porch, figures moved back and forth in costume, practicing blocking for some unseen director. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, looked again. Still there. Through my binoculars, I could see them clearly. Benjamin Torres, wearing the same hiking clothes he'd disappeared in 3 years ago, but somehow perfectly clean and pressed. A young Asian woman who had to be Sarah Chen, reported missing in 2007. David Martinez, missing from last year. And there, center stage on the porch, was Megan Foster. She wore a flowing white dress that seemed to glow in the strange light. Her movements were precise, rehearsed as she ran through what looked like the same scene over and over again. Her mouth moved, but I couldn't hear the words from this distance. None of them looked injured. None looked distressed. They looked professional. My radio crackled to life on its own. "Marcus, dear boy, you're late for rehearsal." The voice was cultured, theatrical, with a slight British accent. "The others are waiting. We've been preparing your scene for quite some time." I yanked the radio from my belt and held it at arm's length like it might bite me. "Who is this? Where's Megan Foster?" "Oh, Megan is perfect in her role. Natural talent, that one. But you, Marcus, you're the one we've really been waiting for. The witness. The one who sees what others cannot. The one who carries the story." Static filled the channel, then cleared to reveal something impossible. Emma's voice. "Daddy? Daddy, I'm here. I'm in the play too. Come find me." The radio went dead in my hand. I don't remember making the decision to approach the house. One moment I was crouched behind a fallen log. The next I was walking across the clearing toward the porch steps. My boots made no sound on the wooden boards, as if the house itself was muffling my approach. Up close, I could see the actors more clearly. They moved with the fluid precision of people who'd performed the same blocking thousands of times. Their eyes held no recognition of my presence. focused entirely on their invisible director. "Excellent entrance, Marcus." The voice came from the shadows beside the front door. A tall, gaunt man in a Victorian-era suit stepped into the light. His face was sharp-featured and pale, with eyes that reflected light like an animal's. "Jonathan Morrison, at your service. Welcome to our eternal performance." "Where's my daughter?" The words came out as a growl. Morrison smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp. "Emma is precisely where she belongs, where all lost souls belong, in the story. She's been waiting for you to join the cast, Marcus. 3 months is such a long time to hold a role." Behind him, the other actors continued their silent scene. Megan Foster turned toward me, and for a split second, her eyes seemed to focus, to see me. Her mouth formed a single word: "Help." Then the expression vanished, replaced by the blank concentration of an actor deep in character. "You see," Morrison continued, circling me like a predator, "theater requires witnesses. What good is a performance without an audience? But in our little production, the audience eventually becomes part of the show. That's the magic of live theater. The fourth wall is just an illusion." I reached for my service weapon, but my hand passed through empty air. Looking down, I saw that my gear belt was gone. Radio, gun, flashlight, all vanished. Now, Morrison clucked. "No props that aren't in the script. This is your audition, Marcus. The role of the witness requires only one thing: the ability to see the truth, to understand that some stories are more real than reality itself." He gestured toward the actors on the porch. Each of them came here lost, searching for something. Benjamin sought adventure. Sarah sought her missing father. David sought redemption for a drunk driving accident. Megan sought solace in nature after a painful breakup. Morrison's eyes gleamed. "And you, Marcus Sullivan, you seek your daughter, the child taken too soon by leukemia, who loved theater more than anything else in the world. She's here, Marcus. She's been here all along, waiting for her final scene. Emma's dead." The words tasted like ashes. "She died at Children's Hospital. I buried her." "Death is just another kind of performance," Morrison said softly. "And this is her stage now. Our stage. Forever." The house around us began to change. The walls grew transparent, revealing the truth beneath. Charred beams, crumbling foundation, empty air. But the actors remained solid, real, continuing their eternal rehearsal. "Your choice is simple," Morrison continued. "Join the cast willingly, and you'll be reunited with Emma. Refuse, and spend eternity watching from the audience, unable to interact, unable to save anyone, including yourself." That's when I heard it again. Emma's laugh, pure, joyful, echoing from somewhere inside the house. I found myself moving toward that sound, past Morrison, past the other actors, through the front door of a house that was somehow both there and not there. Inside, the rooms shifted and flowed like stage sets being changed between acts. One moment I was in a living room with a stone fireplace, the next in what looked like backstage at a theater, complete with costume racks and makeup mirrors. "Daddy!" Emma ran toward me from the wings, wearing her favorite dress, the blue one with tiny flowers that we'd buried her in. She looked exactly as she had before the cancer, before the treatments stole her hair and hollowed her cheeks. Healthy, happy, alive. I dropped to my knees as she crashed into my arms, solid and warm and real. The smell of her strawberry shampoo filled my nostrils, and for a moment nothing else mattered. "I've been waiting for you," she whispered against my neck. "Mr. Morrison said you'd come eventually. He said grief always brings people to the theater. Emma, baby, we need to get out of here. This isn't real." She pulled back to look at me, her green eyes, so much like her mother's, filled with confusion. "But Daddy, this is the most real thing ever. Here I can dance and sing and act forever. I'm not sick anymore. Don't you want to stay with me?" Behind her, I could see the other actors going through their motions. But now I noticed something I'd missed before. Their costumes were slowly changing, aging, becoming more elaborate. Benjamin Torres's hiking gear had transformed into a Victorian explorer's outfit. Sarah Chen now wore a 1920s flapper dress. David Martinez was dressed as a Depression-era drifter. They were being consumed by their roles layer by layer, until nothing of their original selves remained. "Emma," I said carefully, "do you remember your real life? Do you remember Mom, your school, your friends?" A shadow passed across her face. "Those are just other plays. From before. This is the important one, Daddy. This is where we get to be together forever. But what about the other people? What about Megan? She has a family too." Emma's expression grew troubled. "Mr. Morrison says some people need the theater more than their families need them. He says we're saving them from pain." That's when I understood. Morrison wasn't just collecting performers. He was collecting the lost, the grieving, the broken, people whose pain made them vulnerable to the promise of a story without endings, a performance that never disappointed, never let them down. But Emma wasn't lost. She wasn't broken. She was being used. I stood up, keeping Emma close but turning to face Morrison, who had appeared in the wings like smoke given form. "Clever boy," he said, applauding slowly. "You see it now, don't you? The truth behind the performance. But understanding and escaping are two very different acts." "Let them go," I said, "all of them. They don't belong here." Morrison laughed, a sound like wind through empty theaters. "Belong? Marcus, they chose this. Every single one of them walked onto my stage willingly, just as you did. Just as Emma did when the pain of her illness became too much for a child to bear. Emma was dying. She was scared. And I gave her eternity without fear. I gave her a stage where cancer doesn't exist, where little girls can dance forever." His voice turned silky, persuasive. "I'm offering you the same gift, a story without loss." I looked around at the other actors, really seeing them for the first time. The blank concentration in their eyes wasn't peaceful. It was empty. They weren't performing. They were being performed, puppets in someone else's play. "What kind of theater has no audience?" I asked. Morrison's smile faltered. "What? You said theater needs witnesses, but there's no one watching this performance except you. No applause that matters, no reviews, no curtain call. It's not theater, it's a prison." "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." I knelt down to Emma's level again. "Baby, do you remember what you told me about acting, the most important thing?" Emma's brow furrowed, and for a moment her eyes cleared. That the story has to end for it to mean something?" "That's right. Every play has a final curtain. That's what makes the performance special. It doesn't last forever." Morrison stepped forward, his form becoming less solid, more frantic. "No, she's mine now. You're all mine. The performance cannot end." But Emma was looking at me with growing awareness. "Daddy, I'm tired of this play. I want to go home." "Then let's go home, sweetheart." I stood and faced the other actors. "Benjamin, Sarah, David, Megan, the show is over. Time for curtain call." One by one, their eyes began to focus. Megan Foster blinked, looked around in confusion, then saw me. "Ranger Sullivan? How did I... Where am I?" The house around us began to shake, stage flats falling, lights dimming. Morrison's form was fragmenting, his voice becoming a shriek. "You cannot leave. The story must continue. The show must go on." "The show," I said firmly, taking Emma's hand in one of mine and reaching for Megan with the other, "is over." The transition was like waking from a dream within a dream. One moment we were in Morrison's impossible theater. The next we were standing in the ruins of the real homestead, charred foundation stones, collapsed chimney, October rain beginning to fall through the canopy above. Emma was gone. But Megan Foster stood beside me, shivering in her hiking clothes, very much alive. The other missing people, Benjamin, Sarah, David, were scattered around the ruins, looking dazed, but breathing. "What happened?" Megan asked. I remember starting my hike then. Nothing until now. I helped her sit down on a fallen log, checking her for injuries. "You got lost. I said simply. But you're safe now. My radio crackled to life with normal static. Sullivan, come in. We've got search teams mobilizing. What's your status? Base, this is Sullivan. I've found Megan Foster and several other missing persons. We're at the old Morrison property. Request immediate medical evacuation for 5 individuals. Copy that, Sullivan. Outstanding work. EMTs are en route. As we waited for the helicopter, I sat quietly with the survivors. Benjamin Torres looked at me with haunted eyes and said, I dreamed I was in a play that never ended. Dreams can feel very real, I replied. But in my pocket, I could feel the weight of something impossible. The theater program, still there, still real. When I pulled it out, the cast list had changed. Every name was crossed out except one, Jonathan Morrison, the director, final performance. Below that, in different handwriting, Emma's careful cursive was a note. Thank you for helping me remember, Daddy. The story was beautiful, but it needed to end so a new one could begin. I love you. Break a leg in your next performance. Emma. I still work in these woods, not because I have to, but because I choose to. Someone needs to watch for other lost souls who might wander into Morrison's trap. The ruins of the homestead are just ruins now. I check on them every week. Megan Foster sent me a Christmas card from Portland where she's teaching kindergarten. Benjamin Torres returned to acting in community theater. Sarah Chen found her way back to her family. David Martinez started a non-profit for drunk driving prevention. They all remember it as getting lost in the woods for a few hours. The mind protects itself in mysterious ways. I never saw Emma again, but sometimes when I'm walking the trail where it all began, I hear her laughter carried on the wind. Not trapped or lonely, but free. Moving on to whatever stage comes next. That's the thing about stories. They don't end, they just transform. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they transform you too. My name is Marcus Sullivan, and I've learned that the most important role any of us can play is simply this: to witness the stories around us, to help them find their proper endings, and to trust that new beginnings are always possible, even in the darkest woods. Author's note. This story was inspired by the many real search and rescue operations conducted by park rangers across the United States. While the supernatural elements are fictional, the dedication and courage of rangers who risk their lives to save others is very real. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been a ranger at Olympic National Park for 6 years. My grandfather was a ranger here for 32 years, my father for 28. 3 generations of Morrisons protecting these 922,000 acres of temperate rainforest in Washington state. It was October 2019 when everything changed, when I discovered that some of the stories my grandfather used to tell by the fireplace weren't just legends. I had just been promoted to Chief Ranger of the Hoh River region, replacing veteran Tom Henley, who'd retired the month before. At 32, I was the youngest chief in the park's history, and I felt the weight of that responsibility in every decision I made. 3 district supervisors watched me like hawks, waiting for the slightest mistake to question my appointment. It was on a cold Tuesday that I received the call that would change everything. For some, the message. The office phone rang at 2:47 p.m., emergency direct line. Olympic National Park, Jake Morrison speaking. Ranger Morrison. The voice belonged to an Asian woman, loaded with barely controlled panic. My daughter, she didn't come back from the trail yesterday. Sophia Chen, 23 years old. She always calls when she gets home, always. I grabbed the standard missing person form, but my hand hesitated when she continued. She left a strange voicemail yesterday at 7 p.m. You need to hear it. There's something wrong with the recording. 15 minutes later, Mrs. Chen was in my office. Her eyes were swollen from crying, contrasting with her upright, determined posture. She placed her cell phone on my desk. Sophia was hiking the Hoh River Trail to the hot springs. She should have been back yesterday evening. I pressed play. Sophia's voice started clear. Hi, Mom. I'm at the hot springs. The trail was beautiful. I took some amazing photos of the Her voice hesitated, as if something had caught her attention. Then I heard it. In the background of the recording, beneath the normal forest sounds, there was something that made my skin crawl. A whisper. No, multiple whispers. Overlapping voices speaking in some language I didn't recognize, and beneath that, laughter. Children's laughter. "Mom, are you hearing this?" Sophia's voice suddenly sounded frightened. There are children here, but I haven't seen anyone. Oh God." The line went dead for 5 seconds. When Sophia spoke again, her voice was distorted as if the signal was interfering. "Mom, if you're hearing this, don't come looking for me. Don't let anyone come here. The old woman, she's not what she seems. She's been waiting so long. The recording cut to static, then silence. Mrs. Chen looked at me with desperate eyes. "What does that mean? What old woman? There's nobody supposed to be camping in that area." I stared at the phone, my mouth suddenly dry. My grandfather's voice echoed in my memory. "Jake boy, there are things in these woods older than the trees themselves. The Ho River keeps its secrets, but sometimes they come looking for new blood." I'd always thought it was just stories to scare a kid around the campfire. "Mrs. Chen," I said, standing up and reaching for my gear, "I'm going to find your daughter." The search begins by 4 p.m. I was geared up and heading toward the Ho River Trail. My radio crackled as I checked in with dispatch. "Unit 47 to base, beginning search grid Alpha 7, Ho River Trail, over." "Copy, Unit 47. Be advised, weather front moving in at 1900 hours. Possible rain and fog, over." "Roger. Base." I shouldered my 45-pound pack, loaded with standard SAR gear, GPS unit, first aid kit, emergency shelter, headlamp, extra batteries, emergency rations for 3 days, and my grandfather's old compass, brass and reliable as the day he'd bought it in 1967. The trail started normal enough. Douglas firs towered 200 feet above me, their trunks so massive that 4 people holding hands couldn't wrap around them. The air smelled of decomposing leaves, moss, and that perpetual dampness that defines the Pacific Northwest rainforest. My boots crunched on the carpet of fallen needles as I maintained a steady pace of 3 map. According to the trail log at the visitor center, Sophia had signed in at 11:30 a.m. the previous day. The hot springs were 8.7 miles in. She should have reached them by 2 p.m., spent an hour soaking, and been back to her car by 6 p.m. at the latest. I found her first marker at mile 3.2, a small pile of stones arranged in a perfect spiral. Not natural, not the work of other hikers. I'd seen enough trail markers to know the difference. These stones were placed with intention, almost ritualistic. My radio crackled. "Unit 47, status check, over." "Unit 47, mile 3.2. Found possible trail marker left by subject. Continuing search, over." "Copy. Any sign of distress?" I looked at the stone spiral again. Something about its perfection made my stomach tighten. "Negative distress signals observed, base." As I continued deeper into the forest, the afternoon light began to fade earlier than it should have. The canopy was thick here, but not this thick. I checked my watch. 5:23 p.m. Sunset wasn't for another hour and a half. At mile 5.1, I found the second marker. This time, it wasn't stones. It was Sophia's UC Berkeley sweatshirt, hanging from a branch exactly 7 feet off the ground, too high for her to have hung it there without climbing, and there were no broken branches or scuff marks on the trunk. I called it in, bagged the sweatshirt as evidence, and kept moving. My breathing had become shallow and rapid, like I couldn't pull in enough air. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, no wind rustling the branches. Just the sound of my own footsteps, and something else. At first I thought it was an echo, but echoes don't whisper your name. "Jake." I stopped dead in my tracks. The voice had come from somewhere to my left, maybe 50 yards into the trees. It sounded like a child, a little girl. "Hello?" I called out. "This is Ranger Morrison. Are you lost? Do you need help?" The forest swallowed my words. No response. I pulled out my flashlight and swept the beam through the trees. Nothing but moss-covered trunks and hanging branches. But as I turned to continue on the trail, I heard it again. Jake Morrison. Third generation. My blood turned to ice water. Nobody should know about my family history out here. I keyed my radio. Unit 47 to base. Possible additional subject in area. Child's voice heard off trail. Investigating. Over. Static answered me. I tried again. More static. I checked my GPS. Signal lost. Cell phone. No service. I was completely cut off. 8 miles deep in forest that suddenly felt more hostile than my childhood backyard. The hot springs. By 6:45 p.m., I reached the hot springs. The natural pools steamed in the growing darkness, fed by underground springs that maintained a constant 98 degrees year-round. This should have been where Sophia recorded that terrifying message. I swept my flashlight beam across the area and found her day pack immediately. It was sitting on a flat rock beside the largest pool, perfectly dry despite the constant mist from the hot water. Inside, water bottles still full, energy bars untouched, camera with 127 photos of the hike. The last photo was time-stamped 7:03 p.m. the previous day, 3 minutes after her voicemail. It showed the hot springs from exactly where I was standing. But in the background, barely visible in the steam and shadows, there were shapes. Human shapes. Small ones. Children. I enlarged the image on the camera's LCD screen. The shapes were clearer now. 5 children, standing in a perfect line at the edge of the tree line. They were wearing old-fashioned clothes like something from the early 1900s. But their faces were wrong. Too pale, eyes too dark. And they were all looking directly at the camera. Looking directly at Sophia. "What the hell?" I muttered, and immediately regretted speaking aloud. Because something answered me. Laughter. Children's laughter coming from the exact spot where those shapes had been standing in the photo. But when I spun my flashlight toward the sound, I saw only trees. Then I heard the singing. It was a child's voice, high and sweet, singing what sounded like a lullaby in a language I didn't recognize. The melody was haunting, beautiful, and absolutely terrifying in the context of this empty forest. The singing was moving, getting closer. I grabbed Sophia's pack and backed toward the trail, my flashlight sweeping frantically through the trees. The beam caught something that made me gasp. Footprints in the soft earth around the hot springs. Small bare feet, child-sized, but they didn't lead to or from the springs. They formed a circle around the entire area, like the children had been dancing. The singing stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard something that made my knees nearly buckle. She's with us now, Jake Morrison. She's with the old mother, just like the others. The voice came from directly behind me. I spun around, flashlight raised like a weapon, and screamed. Standing 3 feet away was a child. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, wearing a faded blue dress that looked like it belonged in a museum. Her skin was white as bone. Her hair hung in limp, wet strands around her face, and her eyes... God, her eyes were black from lid to lid, but she was smiling. A sweet, innocent smile that made everything infinitely worse. "The old mother has been waiting for a Morrison to come back," she said in that sing-song voice. "She remembers your grandfather. She remembers when he ran away." "Where is Sophia?" I managed to force out through my constricted throat. The girl tilted her head, and I heard her neck bones crack. "She's learning the old songs, just like we did, just like you will." The girl stepped toward me, and I stumbled backward. My heel caught on a root and I went down hard, my flashlight flying from my hand and clattering across the rocks. The beam spun wildly before settling on something that made me want to vomit. There were more children now. Dozens of them standing in a perfect circle around the hot springs. All wearing old clothes. All with that bone-white skin and those terrible black eyes. And they were all staring at me with those sweet, innocent smiles. "Come with us, Jake," they said in unison. "Come meet the old mother." I scrambled for my flashlight, grabbed it, and ran. Barrier the pursuit. I crashed through the forest like a wounded animal, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly as branches tore at my clothes and face. Behind me, I could hear them following, not running, but walking with that measured, inevitable pace that was somehow infinitely more terrifying. And they were still singing. The lullaby drifted through the trees, sometimes close enough to whisper in my ear, sometimes fading to a distant hum. But it never stopped. It was like they were taking turns, passing the melody from one child to another as they herded me deeper into the forest. I tried to follow the trail back, but nothing looked familiar. Every tree seemed the same. Every shadow could hide one of those pale faces. My GPS was still dead, my radio nothing but static. Even my grandfather's compass spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I burst into a clearing I'd never seen before. In the center stood a cabin. It was old, really old. Hand-hewn logs black with age, a roof covered in moss and small saplings, windows so dirty they looked opaque. But there was light inside, flickering, like candles or a fire, and I could smell something cooking, something that made my empty stomach growl despite my terror. "She's waiting for you, Jake." I spun around. The girl in the blue dress was standing at the edge of the clearing, no longer alone. The other children flanked her, their pale faces glowing in my flashlight beam like a row of lanterns. "She's been cooking for you," another child said. This one was a boy, maybe 10, wearing knickers and suspenders. "She always cooks for the Morrisons." "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "We want you to come home," they said together. "We want you to join the family." The cabin door creaked open. What emerged wasn't human, couldn't be human. It had once been a woman, maybe centuries ago, but time and something far worse had twisted it into a nightmare. It stood 8 feet tall, its limbs too long and jointed in too many places. Its skin hung in gray folds, and its hair was white as bone and reached nearly to the ground. But the worst part was its face. It was beautiful. Ancient, lined with countless years, but beautiful in the way that mountains and deep forests are beautiful. Timeless, powerful, and absolutely indifferent to human suffering. "Jake Morrison," it said, and its voice was like wind through autumn leaves. "Welcome home, child." "You knew my grandfather," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Oh yes," the thing smiled, revealing teeth like broken glass. "Thomas Morrison. Such a handsome boy. He came to me in 1967, just like his father before him, just like his father before him. The Morrison men always find their way to me eventually." "What happened to them?" "The same thing that happened to all my children." She gestured to the pale-faced kids surrounding me. "They joined my family. Forever and always." I looked at the children again and understood with sick certainty that these weren't spirits or hallucinations. These were real children who had vanished over the decades. The missing hikers, the lost campers, the day trippers who never came home. And somewhere among them was Sophia Chen. "Where is she?" I demanded. The witch tilted her head, considering. "Which one, dear? I have so many daughters now." "Sophia, the girl who disappeared yesterday." "Ah yes, the pretty Asian child. She's inside, learning to cook. She's quite talented, much better than the last Morrison who visited." "My grandfather." She was talking about my grandfather. "He visited you?" "Oh yes, many times. He was my favorite for years. But then he met that woman, got married, had children, started forgetting about old mother, started telling people I was just a story." Her expression darkened, and the temperature in the clearing dropped 10 degrees. "I don't like being forgotten, Jake Morrison." "The choice. I'll make you the same offer I made him," the witch continued, circling me slowly. Her feet didn't quite touch the ground. "Join my family willingly, and I'll let the girl go. Fight me and she stays forever, just like these sweet children." I looked at the pale faces surrounding me. Some couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 when she took them. Others were teenagers, all staring at me with those terrible black eyes, smiling those sweet, empty smiles. How do I know you'll keep your word? Because I am old, Jake Morrison, and I am patient. I would rather have one Morrison willingly than a dozen taken by force. Your bloodline, it's special. It tastes of forest and earth and growing things. It's been feeding me for generations. She leaned closer, and I could smell her breath, like compost and rotting flowers and something else, something sweet and cloying that made my head spin. Your great-great-grandfather built this cabin for me in 1887. Your great-grandfather brought me my first children in 1923. Your grandfather, he was going to bring me his son, but love made him weak. The pieces clicked together in my mind. The stories my grandfather told weren't warnings. They were confessions. He'd been feeding people to this thing for years before he found the strength to stop. You're lying, I said. Am I? She smiled. Check your grandfather's old things, Jake Morrison. Check the basement of that house where you grew up. Count the missing person reports that stopped when he retired. I thought about all the stories, all the legends about hikers who vanished without a trace, about the old cabin in the woods that appeared and disappeared, about the children's voices that lured people off the trail. The Morrison men have always been my shepherds, the witch continued, guiding the lost sheep to mother's door. You can continue the family tradition, or you can watch your friend die slowly, over many years, as I teach her the old songs. From inside the cabin I heard a scream, Sophia's scream. The confrontation. I made my choice. Let her go. Wonderful. The witch clapped her hands together, and the sound was like breaking bones. I knew you were a smart boy, just like your grandfather. Let her go first. Oh no, dear child. First you come inside. First you take your place at the family table. Then the girl can leave. The children began to close in around me, still smiling, still humming that awful lullaby. I backed toward the cabin, my mind racing. There had to be another way. There had to be something my grandfather had known, some weakness he'd discovered. That's when I remembered his compass. Not just any compass, a brass Brunton Transit he'd bought in 1967. The same year he'd stopped feeding people to the witch. He'd given it to me on my 18th birthday with only one piece of advice. Some things that look lost can still find their way home, Jake. You just have to know which direction is true north. I pulled out the compass. It was still spinning wildly, unable to find magnetic north. But as I watched the needle dance, I realized it wasn't random. It was pointing consistently in one direction, toward the cabin. Not toward magnetic north, toward the witch. She was the magnetic center of this place, the anchor point that kept this pocket of forest trapped outside normal reality. And if she was the anchor, I snapped open the compass case and found what my grandfather had hidden there 60 years ago. A small piece of iron, filed to a sharp point and blessed by a Kino tribal elder. A gift from the native people who had been fighting this thing for centuries before the first European ever set foot in these woods. Iron, the witch hissed, suddenly recoiling. Clever boy, just like your grandfather. The children's smiles faltered for the first time. Their black eyes flickered, showing glimpses of human consciousness underneath. Scared, confused, trapped. You can't kill me with that little needle, Jake Morrison. I don't have to kill you, I said, advancing toward her. I just have to set them free. I lunged forward and drove the iron needle directly into her heart. The scream that erupted from her throat wasn't sound. It was pain made audible, grief given voice, rage transformed into pure acoustic violence. Every window in the cabin exploded. Trees cracked and fell. The ground itself seemed to buckle and writhe. But more importantly, the children began to change. The pale, death-white skin faded to normal human tones. The terrible black eyes cleared, showing brown and blue and green irises underneath. The sweet, empty smiles became expressions of confusion, fear, and finally, blessedly, recognition. "Where are we?" one of them asked. "How long have we been here?" said another, "I want to go home," whispered a little girl who couldn't have been more than 5. The witch looked down at the iron needle protruding from her chest. Black blood seeped around the wound, but she wasn't dying. Instead, she was diminishing, growing smaller, more human, more mortal. "You haven't won, Jake Morrison," she wheezed. "I am older than your civilization. I will heal. I will find you." "Maybe," I said, "but not today. Try the rescue." I found Sophia in the cabin's kitchen, tied to a chair with what looked like vines. She was conscious but drugged. Her eyes were glazed, and she kept mumbling something in what sounded like the same language the children had been speaking. "Sophia, Sophia, can you hear me?" Her eyes focused slowly. "Jake? How did you... Where are we?" "Long story. Can you walk?" I cut her free and helped her to her feet. She was shaky but mobile. Outside, the children were helping each other, sharing names and trying to piece together how they'd ended up here. Some of them had been missing for decades. There were kids in this group who had disappeared during my grandfather's time. The witch sat slumped against a tree, no longer the towering nightmare she'd been. She looked like what she probably was, an ancient woman, possibly Native American, bent and twisted by centuries of dark magic and human sacrifice. The iron needle had somehow severed her connection to the children, broken whatever spell bound them to this place. "The trail," Sophia said suddenly. "We need to find the trail." But when I looked around, the forest had changed. The trees were different, younger, healthier. The oppressive darkness had lifted, replaced by normal moonlight filtering through the canopy. And in the distance, I could see the glow of electric lights, the ranger station. We were less than a mile from headquarters. "Come on," I told the group of freed children. "Let's go home." The aftermath. It took 3 days to sort everything out. 17 children, ranging in age from 5 to 19, all missing persons from the past 40 years. The FBI got involved, then the state police, then social services. The media had a field day with the story of the Olympic Forest miracle. 17 missing children found alive and unharmed after decades of disappearance. Of course, nobody believed the real story. The official report blamed a survivalist cult, a shared psychological break, mass hallucination brought on by exposure to natural gas seepage from underground fissures. Anything but the truth. Sophia recovered fully, though she couldn't remember much about her time in the cabin. She'd been there for less than 24 hours, but she'd aged maybe a month in that time. Her hair was longer, her fingernails grown out, like she'd been there for weeks. The children adapted with varying degrees of success. The younger ones were easier to rehabilitate. Their families were overjoyed to have them back, regardless of the impossibility of the situation. The older ones, especially those who'd been missing for 20 or 30 years, faced a more difficult transition. Their parents were elderly or dead. The world had changed beyond recognition. Technology had advanced in ways they couldn't comprehend. But they were alive. They were free, and that had to be enough. As for me, I kept my job as chief ranger, though the supervisors watched me even more closely now. The official story was that I'd stumbled across the cult's hideout during a routine search and rescue operation. I received a commendation for exceptional service under extraordinary circumstances. I never went back to look for the witch, but I know she's still out there, somewhere in the deep forest, healing, growing stronger, waiting for another Morrison to find her. Force the truth. 3 weeks after the rescue, I finally worked up the courage to search my grandfather's basement. I found them in an old steamer trunk behind the water heater. 43 missing person reports spanning 32 years. All hikers, campers, or day trippers who had vanished in the Olympic National Forest between 1935 and 1967. All people my grandfather had been officially assigned to search for. None of them had ever been found. At the bottom of the trunk was a letter addressed to me, written in my grandfather's careful handwriting. Jake, if you're reading this, then you've met her, the old mother, the witch of Ho River. I prayed you'd never have to, but I always knew the bloodline would call you eventually. I was young and stupid when I started. She convinced me I was helping people, giving them a purpose, making them part of something eternal and beautiful. By the time I understood what I was really doing, I'd led dozens of innocent people to their deaths. I tried to stop in 1967, but she told me the price. If I ever stopped feeding her, she'd come for my family instead. For my son, for my grandson, for every Morrison yet to be born. I chose to break the cycle and accept the consequences. I spent the last 50 years preparing for the day she'd finally come calling. The Iron Needle was blessed by Joseph Tahola of the Quinault Nation. He told me his people had been fighting her for 1,000 years, that she was as old as the forest itself. Iron breaks her hold on the living, but it can't destroy her. Nothing can. She just goes dormant, waits for the next generation. You did better than I ever hoped, boy. You saved them all. But this isn't over. It never really ends. Stay vigilant. Stay away from the deep forest. And if you ever hear children singing in the woods, run. Love. Grandpa Tom. P.S. Check the basement of the old Morrison homestead on Beaver Creek Road, behind the false wall. You'll find what's left of the ones I couldn't save. Give them a proper burial. It's the least an old man can do. I burned the letter after reading it, but I kept the list of names. 2 years have passed since the Hoh River incident. I still work as chief ranger, still protect these ancient forests, still guide lost hikers safely home. But everything has changed. I know what's really out there now, in the deep places where the trees grow so thick that noon looks like twilight. I know that some of the missing persons reports that cross my desk aren't about people who got lost or injured or fell off a cliff. They're about people who heard children singing in the woods. The witch is still out there. I can feel her sometimes when I'm alone on the trail, like a cold spot that moves just outside my peripheral vision. She's healing, growing stronger, waiting, and I know that someday, maybe not this year, maybe not this decade, but someday, she'll be ready to try again. But I'm ready too. I carry my grandfather's compass everywhere now, and I've learned more about iron and blessing, and the old ways the Quinault Nation used to keep the forest spirits at bay. I've made contact with the tribal elders, learned some of the old songs that can turn hungry spirits away from human prey. Most importantly, I've accepted something my grandfather never could. This is my responsibility now. The Morrison bloodline didn't curse me, it chose me. For 3 generations, my family has stood between ordinary people and something ancient and hungry and terrible. And I'm okay with that. Because every person who walks out of these woods safely, every family that doesn't have to spend years wondering what happened to their loved one, every child who grows up without being lured away by beautiful singing in the darkness, that's worth carrying this burden. My name is Jake Morrison, and I am the guardian of Olympic National Forest, and I am not afraid. This story is a work of fiction. Olympic National Park is a real place of extraordinary beauty and safety. The Quinault Nation is a real tribal community with a rich cultural heritage. Any resemblance to actual supernatural events is purely coincidental. Probably. My name is Kevin O'Brien, and for 15 years as a ranger at Olympic National Park, I've always believed that nature had logical explanations for everything. Predators, falls, hypothermia, disorientation, these were the real dangers of the forest. Until that October night in 2019, when I received a message that would forever change my perception of what truly lurks in the shadows between the pine trees. It was 11:47 p.m. when my Motorola GP340 radio crackled with unusual static. I was finishing my last report of the day in the Section 7 cabin, instant coffee already cold in my National Park Service logo mug. The scent of Douglas fir and the characteristic dampness of northwest autumn drifted through the cracked window. Kshh. Base. Olympic base. Someone. Interference. Need help. Violent static. They're back. The symbols. Sound of breaking branches. Hoh River Trail. Coordinates. Kirsch. 47.8606. 123.9348. Jessica Williams. They found me, lying dead. My fingers went numb gripping the radio. This wasn't normal protocol. Visitors use cell phones or our emergency phones, not ranger frequencies. But the name Jessica Williams hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew that name from entry records. Jessica Williams, 23 years old, from Seattle, registered for solo camping 3 days ago on the Hoh River Trail. I grabbed my Garmin GPS and entered the coordinates. Sector 12 Delta, approximately 5 miles into the trail, in an area known as Devil's Backbone by the older rangers. My breathing became shallow. I couldn't pull in enough air, as if the oxygen had become thinner. Protocol required me to contact Central first, but something in her voice, the pure, almost primitive panic, made me grab my 65-liter Osprey pack and start checking my equipment. Petzl headlamp, GPS, first aid kit, climbing rope, backup radio, water purifier, emergency rations. My phone buzzed. Text from my wife, Sarah. "Kevin, we need to talk when you get home. It's about Emma. It's serious." Emma, our 16-year-old daughter. Over the past few months, she'd become a stranger in our own home, grades plummeting, coming home late, lying about where she'd been. Sarah found marijuana in her room last week. The family therapy we'd started was a disaster, with Emma refusing to speak and me always missing sessions because of work. But not now. Jessica Williams was out there, in real danger. I started the engine of my 2018 Ford Ranger pickup and headed down Highway 101 toward the Hoh River trailhead. The speedometer held steady at 80 mph while I tried to process what I'd heard. They're back. Back from where? The symbols. What symbols? Throughout my entire career, I'd collected reports of strange sightings that always had rational explanations. Lights in the sky were military aircraft from nearby bases. Frightening sounds were elk during mating season. Mysterious structures were improvised shelters from homeless people. But as I drove through the absolute darkness, with only headlights cutting through the dense fog forming over the wet asphalt, a buried memory began to surface. 1987. I was 12 years old. My Uncle Frank, who was also a ranger, telling stories around the campfire about a cult that operated in the depths of Olympic Forest in the 60s and 70s. He said the FBI and local authorities conducted a joint operation in 1978, arresting dozens of people involved in bizarre rituals and at least 5 confirmed disappearances. They marked the trees with strange symbols, my uncle would whisper, nervously glancing at the darkness beyond the firelight. Circles inside triangles always carved into the bark with something sharp. They said it was to mark sacred territory. At the time, I thought they were just stories to scare children. Now, with the echo of that desperate voice still reverberating in my mind, I began to question what I really knew about this place's history. I parked at the Hoh River trailhead at 12:34 a.m. The temperature was 39 degrees according to the dashboard thermometer, and a constant breeze made the 200-foot Douglas fir canopies sway like giants whispering ancient secrets. I put on my Patagonia R1 jacket, adjusted my headlamp, and checked the GPS once more. 5 miles. On known terrain with good lighting, I could do this in 2 hours. But in the dark, with dense fog and having to follow clues from a fragmented message, it would be much longer. Before starting the hike, I tried calling Central. Olympic Base, this is Ranger O'Brien, badge 2847. I received a distress call from coordinates 478606, 123.9348. Requesting immediate backup for search and rescue operation. Nothing but static. I tried my cell phone. No signal. The fog was thicker here, and the nearest cell tower was 15 miles away across mountainous terrain. My shoulders climbed until they almost touched my ears as I realized I was completely on my own. Chapter 2. Into the Backbone. The Hoh River Trail at night is a completely different world from the popular daytime hike that thousands of tourists enjoy each year. My Petzl headlamp carved a narrow cone of white light through air so thick with moisture it was almost tangible. The beam revealed a tunnel of massive tree trunks, some over 800 years old, their bark furrowed like ancient skin. The first mile passed without incident. Standard Pacific Northwest temperate rainforest, the earthy smell of decomposing leaves mixed with the sharp scent of evergreen sap. My boots, waterproof Merrill Moabs, crunched on the well-maintained gravel path. The sound of the Ho River running parallel to the trail was a constant whisper about 50 yards to my left. But as I deeper into the forest, moving away from the maintained portion of the trail, things began to feel wrong. At mile marker 2, I found the first anomaly, a Douglas fir, maybe 150 years old, with deep carved marks in its bark. Not the random scratches of bear claws or the smooth rubs from elk antlers. These were deliberate, geometric. A circle, roughly 8 inches in diameter, with a triangle carved inside it. And within the triangle, symbols that looked almost like letters, but from no alphabet I recognized. My peripheral vision disappeared, like looking through a tube, as I studied the carving. The cuts were fresh, sap still bleeding from the wounds in the bark. Someone had made this within the last few days. I photographed it with my phone's camera, though the flash seemed inadequate against the pressing darkness around me. The silence was total now. No owl calls, no rustling of small mammals, not even the distant sound of the river. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. At mile 3, I found the second symbol, then a third at mile 3.5. Each carved into progressively larger trees, each getting more complex. The final one I found before reaching the coordinates was carved into a massive western red cedar that had to be over 1,000 years old. The symbol was enormous, nearly 3 feet across, and the cuts were so deep they went through the outer bark into the living wood beneath. But it was what I found at the base of that cedar that made my hands tremble as I reached for my radio. Scattered personal items. A purple North Face sleeping bag, partially unrolled. A stainless steel water bottle with Jessica written in black Sharpie on the side. A smartphone with a cracked screen, the battery completely dead, and tracks. Boot prints in the soft earth, size 7 or 8, consistent with a young woman, but alongside them other prints, bare feet, at least 6 different sets, judging by the size variations, and they were fresh, made within hours, the edges still sharp and clear. Olympic base, this is O'Brien. I've found evidence of the missing hiker at coordinates 47.8604, 123.9351. Requesting immediate backup. I repeat, I have found static, then nothing. I tried my cell phone again. No signal. Even my GPS was acting strange. The satellite connection kept cutting in and out, the screen flickering between accurate coordinates and complete nonsense readings. The metallic taste of fear filled my mouth as I realized how completely isolated I was. No communication, unreliable navigation, and somewhere in this forest, Jessica Williams was in the hands of people who carved symbols into ancient trees and left barefoot tracks in the mud. I shouldered my pack and followed the trail of bare footprints deeper into what the old-timers called Devil's Backbone. Chapter 3. The Encampment. The footprints led off the established trail, winding through increasingly dense undergrowth where no tourist would ever venture. My headlamp beam caught spider webs thick as silk curtains stretched between massive fern fronds. The air grew colder. I could see my breath now, white puffs that dissipated quickly in the humidity. After another half-mile of following the tracks, I smelled smoke. Not the clean scent of a campfire, but something acrid and wrong. Like burning plastic mixed with something organic and rotten. My stomach clenched as the smell triggered some primal alarm system hardwired into human DNA. I switched off my headlamp and let my eyes adjust to the darkness. Slowly, a faint orange glow became visible through the trees ahead. I approached with the careful, deliberate steps my military training had drilled into me 15 years ago, before I became a ranger. What I found in a small clearing 200 yards off trail challenged everything I thought I knew about the modern world. 12 people sat in a perfect circle around a fire pit constructed from river stones. Men and women, ranging from teenagers to elderly, all completely naked, despite the near freezing temperature. Their skin was painted with the same symbols I'd seen carved into the trees. Circles, triangles, and those strange letter-like marks that hurt to look at directly. At the center of the circle, suspended over the fire from a tripod made of lashed branches, hung a metal pot that definitely wasn't camping equipment. It looked handmade, beaten from raw metal, and whatever was cooking inside produced that horrible smell, but it was what lay at the edge of the firelight that made my vision tunnel and my hands shake uncontrollably. Jessica Williams. She was alive, but bound with rope to a wooden post, driven into the ground. Her clothes were torn, her face streaked with dirt and tears, but her eyes were alert and focused. She'd seen me approaching from the darkness. Our eyes met across the clearing. I pressed a finger to my lips and pointed to my radio, trying to signal that help was coming. But even as I made the gesture, I knew it was a lie. No one was coming. No one even knew where I was. One of the figures around the fire, an elderly man with a long gray beard, stood and approached Jessica. He carried something in his hands that glinted in the firelight. A knife. "The vessel is prepared," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the still air. "The old ones have waited 41 years for this night. The constellation is perfect. The barriers are thin." Jessica's muffled screams through her gag sent ice water through my veins. I had perhaps 30 seconds before whatever was about to happen became irreversible. 12 people. One of me. No backup. No communication with the outside world. But I thought of Emma, my daughter who was spiraling out of control while I threw myself into work. I thought of Sarah, my wife who'd been trying to hold our family together while I convinced myself that my job was more important than being present. I thought of all the times I'd chosen logic over intuition, protocol over instinct. Not tonight. I keyed my radio to the emergency frequency and pressed the transmit button, knowing full well no one would hear it. "This is Ranger Kevin O'Brien, badge 2847. I am at coordinates 47.8606, 123.9348, Devil's Backbone area. I have found missing hiker Jessica Williams. She is being held by a hostile group of approximately 12 individuals engaged in what appears to be ritual activity. I am going in. If anyone receives this transmission, send all available units to these coordinates immediately." I clipped the radio to my belt, drew my service weapon, a Glock 22/40 caliber that I'd hoped never to use outside the range, and stepped into the firelight. "Federal law enforcement, everyone on the ground now." 12 pairs of eyes turned toward me, and in that moment, I realized I had vastly underestimated what I was dealing with. They didn't look surprised. They looked pleased. The elderly man with the knife smiled, revealing teeth filed to sharp points. "Welcome, Ranger O'Brien," he said calmly. "We've been expecting you." Chapter 4. The Truth About Devil's Backbone. How do you know my name? I kept my weapon trained on the elderly man, but my eyes darted between all 12 figures. None of them had moved to the ground. None of them looked afraid of the gun pointed at them. "We know many things," the man replied, taking another step toward Jessica. "We know you have a daughter named Emma who experiments with substances to numb the pain of her parents' neglect. We know your wife Sarah considered filing for divorce last month, but decided to try therapy instead. We know you've spent 15 years in these woods, never believing what the old-timers whispered about this place." My peripheral vision completely disappeared. The world narrowed to just this man, this knife, and Jessica's terrified eyes. "Put the weapon down, Kevin." He used my first name like we were old friends. "You cannot stop what has already begun. The ritual requires a willing participant, and Jessica Williams came to us seeking answers." "That's impossible. She's tied up. She's clearly not willing." The man laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Physical restraints are necessary for the transformation, but she called to us, just like all the others over the years. Just like your daughter will eventually." The mention of Emma made something snap inside me. "You stay away from my family." "Your family?" Another laugh. "Kevin, your family is already broken. You've spent 15 years convincing yourself that logic and protocol could protect you from the truth about this place. But some things can't be explained by your scientific mind." He gestured to the forest around us. "This land was sacred long before European settlers arrived. The Coast Salish tribes knew better than to build permanent settlements here. They called it a thin place, where the boundary between worlds is permeable. We've simply learned to use that permeability. One of the younger cult members, a woman who couldn't have been older than 20, stood and approached my left flank. I swung the gun toward her. "Don't move." But she kept walking, and as she stepped fully into the firelight, I saw something that made my hands shake so violently I nearly dropped the weapon. She had no eyes. Where her eyes should have been were empty sockets that seemed to contain swirling darkness deeper than the night around us. "Ranger O'Brien?" She spoke in perfect English, but her voice had an echo to it, as if multiple people were speaking in unison. "You still believe your weapon can harm us? You still believe this is a situation your training prepared you for?" More figures began standing. A teenage boy with symbols carved directly into his skin. An elderly woman whose limbs bent in directions that defied human anatomy. A middle-aged man whose shadow cast by the firelight didn't match the shape of his body. "What are you?" I whispered. "We are what comes after," the leader said, raising the knife above Jessica's bound form. "The old ones promised us transformation in exchange for service. For 41 years we have waited for the proper alignment. Tonight, with the new moon directly above the devil's backbone, we complete the cycle." The knife began its descent toward Jessica's chest. I fired 3 round center mass into the elderly man. The bullets passed through him like he was made of smoke. He didn't even pause. The knife continued downward. But something else happened that I hadn't expected. My radio, which had been silent for hours, suddenly exploded with static and voices. Ksh! Base to all units. Multiple 911 calls reporting strange lights and sounds from Ho River area. All available personnel respond immediately. Static. "O'Brien, if you can hear this, we have your GPS ping. Backup is en route." The cult members froze. The leader's hand stopped inches from Jessica's chest. "Impossible," he hissed. "The barriers are intact. No signal should penetrate." But my radio kept crackling with incoming transmissions. And something else was happening. The symbols carved into the trees around the clearing began to glow with a faint blue light. "The wards are failing," whispered the eyeless woman. "Something is interfering with the ritual." That's when I realized what was happening. My GPS unit, which had been malfunctioning all night, was now working perfectly. Not only working, it was broadcasting my location on all emergency frequencies. Every time I'd tried to call for backup, every transmission I'd made, had been stored in the device's memory and was now being transmitted simultaneously as the supernatural interference that had been blocking signals began to weaken. The cult's control over this place wasn't absolute. It had limitations. And somehow my stubborn insistence on using technology, on following protocol even when it seemed useless, had found those limitations. But we weren't safe yet. The leader still held the knife, and Jessica was still bound to the post. "You've delayed the inevitable," the leader snarled, "but your backup will become part of the ritual. More vessels for transformation." That's when I heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Helicopter rotors getting closer. Eider, Chapter 5. The Last Stand. The sound of the helicopter sent the cult members into chaos. Some began chanting in a language that hurt my ears, while others scattered into the forest. But the leader remained focused on Jessica, raising the knife again. "If we cannot complete the full ritual, at least one transformation will occur tonight." I lunged forward, abandoning any pretense of cover. My tackle caught him around the waist, just as the knife began its descent. We went down hard, rolling in the dirt next to the fire pit. The smell of that burning mixture was overwhelming up close. Something like sulfur and decay that made my eyes water and my throat close up. The knife skittered away into the darkness as we fought. But this man, whatever he was, possessed strength that defied his apparent age. His fingers found my throat and squeezed with the pressure of a hydraulic vice. "You cannot stop the inevitable," he hissed, his face inches from mine. "The old ones will have their vessels. If not tonight, then tomorrow. If not Jessica Williams, then Emma O'Brien." Hearing my daughter's name gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. I broke his grip, drove my knee into his solar plexus, and scrambled toward where the knife had fallen. My fingers closed around the handle just as the helicopter's spotlight blazed to life above the clearing, turning night into harsh white day. Through the rotor wash and the blinding light, I could hear voices shouting commands and the crash of rangers moving through the undergrowth. But when I turned back toward the cult leader, he was gone. Not hiding, gone. There wasn't enough time for him to have run, and nowhere to hide in the sudden illumination. He had simply ceased to exist. The other cult members had vanished as well. The only evidence they'd ever been there was the fire pit, the wooden post, and Jessica Williams, still bound and gagged but very much alive. I cut her restraints with the ritual knife, my hands shaking so badly I nearly cut her in the process. "It's okay," I said, trying to project calm I didn't feel. "You're safe. Help is here." But as I pulled the gag from her mouth, her first words weren't what I expected. "They showed me things," she whispered, her voice hoarse from screaming. "About this place, about what's coming. The ritual, it wasn't just about me, it was about opening something. And you stopped it tonight, but they said it's only a delay." Rangers rappelled from the helicopter into the clearing. Paramedics rushed to check Jessica while investigators began photographing the scene. My supervisor, Ranger Captain Martinez, approached with questions I wasn't sure how to answer. "O'Brien, what the hell happened out here? Your GPS signal was ping-ponging all over the map for hours, then suddenly locked on this location and started broadcasting on every emergency frequency simultaneously." I looked around the clearing. In the harsh light of the portable floods the investigation team had set up, it looked like an ordinary forest clearing with an improvised fire pit. No carved symbols, no ritual implements. Even the wooden post Jessica had been tied to showed no evidence of restraints. "There was a cult," I said carefully. "Approximately 12 individuals. They had Miss Williams restrained and were engaged in some kind of ritual activity." Martinez frowned. "We found tracks indicating multiple barefoot individuals, and there's definitely evidence of a fire. But no other people, Kevin. Are you sure you didn't experience some kind of disorientation? Hypothermia can cause hallucinations." I wanted to argue, to insist on what I'd seen. But I looked at Jessica, who was staring at me with an expression that clearly said, "They won't believe us. Don't make it worse." "It's possible I was disoriented," I said finally. "It's been a long night." But later, as Jessica was being airlifted to Olympic Medical Center and I was driving my pickup back down Highway 101 in the pre-dawn darkness, my radio crackled one more time. "Kevin O'Brien," came a voice I recognized, the cult leader, speaking clearly despite the radio being tuned to a frequency no civilian should have access to. "You have shown us that the barriers can be penetrated, that modern technology can interfere with ancient protections. This knowledge will serve us well when we return." I grabbed the radio. "Stay away from my family. Stay away from everyone." Static. Then, 41 years we waited for the perfect alignment. We can wait 41 more. But your daughter, she calls to us already. The substances she uses to numb her pain, they make her more receptive to our influence. Perhaps we should thank you for being such an absent father. I drove the rest of the way home in silence, but my mind was racing. Chapter 6. Transformation. I walked into my house at 6:23 a.m. to find Sarah sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, still in her bathrobe, looking like she hadn't slept all night. "Kevin," she stood when she saw me, and I could see she'd been crying. "Emma never came home last night. I've been calling her friends, driving around the neighborhood she hangs out in. I was about to call the police." The cult leader's words echoed in my mind. "Your daughter. She calls to us already." "When did you last see her?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yesterday evening, around 7. She said she was going to study at Madison's house, but when I called Madison's mother at midnight, she said Emma had never been there." I pulled out my phone and dialed Emma's number. It went straight to voicemail. I tried Find My iPhone, Her location services were turned off. "Sarah, I need you to call the police, report her missing. I'm going to check a few places." "Kevin, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I thought about the eyeless woman, the man whose shadow didn't match his body, the knife that passed through air where a person had been standing moments before. "I might have," I said. "But right now, we need to find Emma." I spent the next 4 hours driving to every place I could think of where Emma might go. Her friends' houses, the mall, the community center where she used to take art classes. Nothing. It was Sarah who found the first clue. "Kevin," she called from Emma's room as I walked back into the house. "Come look at this." On Emma's desk, written in her handwriting on a piece of notebook paper, was a message. "Dad, I know you think I'm just a screwed-up kid, but I've found people who understand me. People who accept me for who I really am. They showed me that the pain I feel isn't something to medicate. It's something to embrace. It's a gift. I'm going somewhere safe, where I can learn to use it properly. Don't try to find me. This is my choice. Emma." Below the note, drawn in black ink, was a symbol I recognized with ice-cold certainty. A circle, a triangle inside it, and within the triangle, those same strange letter-like marks I'd seen carved into the ancient trees of Devil's Backbone. My hands began shaking so violently I dropped the note. "Kevin, what is it? What does this mean?" I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and realized that for the first time in years, I was seeing her clearly. The worry lines around her eyes that had developed while I was spending 12-hour days in the forest. The way she held herself like she was carrying a weight too heavy for her shoulders. The wedding ring she still wore despite having every reason to take it off. "It means," I said carefully, "that I've been the worst kind of fool. The kind who thought understanding the job was more important than understanding his family." I told Sarah everything. About the cult, about Jessica Williams, about the transmission that had led me into Devil's Backbone, about entities that looked human but weren't, and about ancient forces that fed on pain and isolation and family dysfunction. She listened without interruption, her face cycling through disbelief, fear, and finally, a grim acceptance. "You think they have Emma," she said when I finished. "I think Emma went to them willingly, just like Jessica Williams did, just like others probably have over the years." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What do we do?" "We go get her." Chapter 7. Return to Devil's Backbone. Sarah insisted on coming with me, despite my arguments about the danger. "She's my daughter too," she said with a finality that brooked no argument. "And maybe she needs to see both her parents fighting for her." We drove back to Olympic National Park as the sun was setting, the same orange glow that had guided me into hell the night before. But this time, I wasn't alone. And this time, I wasn't approaching the situation with just logic and protocol. I'd called Captain Martinez and requested emergency leave, citing family crisis. I'd also filed a formal report about the cult activity, knowing it would be dismissed as stress-induced hallucinations, but wanting an official record nonetheless. More importantly, I'd done research. At the Pierce County Library, Sarah and I had spent the afternoon digging through newspaper archives and historical records. What we found painted a picture that made my encounter with the cult seem like just the latest chapter in a very old story. The Hoh River disappearances had been occurring for over a century. Native American oral histories spoke of people who went to feed the hungry darkness in the deep forest. Early settler accounts described finding campsites with evidence of struggle but no bodies. In the 1960s and 70s, the disappearances had increased dramatically. Young people drawn to the area by stories of spiritual awakening and ancient wisdom. The FBI raid in 1978 had indeed occurred, but the official records were heavily redacted. What wasn't redacted was a list of recovered items, ritual implements, carved totems, and evidence of organized indoctrination activities. 43 people had been arrested, but only 12 had been successfully prosecuted. The rest had simply vanished from custody. And every 41 years, like clockwork, There were spikes in missing person reports from the Olympic Peninsula. 1937, 1978, 2019. We were living through the third cycle. As we parked at the Ho River trailhead, now familiar territory that felt completely different in Sarah's presence, I realized something had changed about my approach to this situation. The previous night, I'd gone in trying to apply rational solutions to an irrational problem. Tonight, I was prepared to abandon rationality entirely, if it meant bringing Emma home. "How do we find them?" Sarah asked as we shouldered our packs. She'd insisted on coming prepared: hiking boots, warm layers, her own flashlight, and emergency supplies. "I don't think we find them," I said. "I think they find us." As if summoned by my words, my radio crackled to life. "Kevin O'Brien," came the now familiar voice of the cult leader. "You've returned, and you've brought your wife. How considerate." I keyed the radio. "Where is my daughter?" "Emma is exactly where she chose to be, learning to embrace her gifts, learning that the pain you and your wife caused her through years of neglect can be transformed into something powerful." Sarah grabbed the radio from my hands. "This is Emma's mother. I want to speak to her. Now." Silence. Then, "Very well." The voice that came through the radio next was one I'd heard every day for 16 years, but it sounded hollow and distant, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "Mom? Dad? I'm okay. I'm exactly where I need to be. Emma, sweetie, we're coming to get you. Just tell us where you are. You don't understand. I don't want to be rescued. These people, they see me, really see me. They understand that what you call my problems are actually gifts. The depression, the anxiety, the feeling like I don't belong anywhere. It's because I'm meant for something more." Sarah's voice cracked as she replied, "Emma, you belong with us. You belong with your family." "Family?" Emma's laugh was bitter. "Dad's never home. You're always stressed about work and money and keeping everything together. When was the last time either of you asked me what I wanted, what I dreamed about, what scared me?" I took the radio back. "Emma, you're right. I haven't been the father you deserved. But that doesn't mean you have to disappear into the forest with people who want to hurt you." "They don't want to hurt me, Dad. They want to help me become what I'm supposed to be." The cult leader's voice returned. "She speaks truly, Kevin O'Brien. Your daughter has a rare sensitivity. Most humans live their entire lives blind to the thin places, the spaces where other realities bleed through. But Emma sees them, feels them. She is valuable to us not as a victim, but as a willing participant." "Participation in what?" Sarah demanded. "The completion of what you interrupted last night. The opening of a permanent gateway. With Jessica Williams, we had a vessel of desperation. But with Emma O'Brien, we have something far more potent. A vessel of inherited sight. The daughter of the man who walked into Devil's Backbone and survived." That's when I understood. My encounter with the cult hadn't been a random intersection of ranger and criminal activity. It had been a test, a way to identify someone who could navigate their supernatural influence and emerge intact. And now they wanted to use my daughter to complete whatever ritual I'd interrupted. "Where are you?" I asked again. "Follow the symbols, Ranger O'Brien, but know that this time there will be no helicopter rescue. No interference from the outside world. Tonight, under the new moon, the barriers are stronger. We have learned from last night's complications." The radio went silent. Sarah and I looked at each other in the growing darkness. "Are you ready for this?" I asked her. Are any parents ever ready to fight supernatural forces for their child's soul? Probably not. Then let's go. Chapter 8. The Heart of Darkness. The symbols started appearing on trees within the first mile of the trail, just as they had the night before. But these were different, more complex, and carved into every tree rather than just occasional markers. It was like walking through a gallery of ancient graffiti, if graffiti could make your eyes water and your stomach clench just from looking at it. Sarah noticed something I'd missed during my solo journey. Kevin, look at the pattern, she said, playing her flashlight beam across a sequence of marked trees. They're not random. They're getting more elaborate as we go deeper. She was right. Near the trailhead, the symbols were simple circles and triangles. But as we progressed, they became intricate geometries that seemed to shift and move when viewed peripherally. And the newer we went, the more my GPS unit malfunctioned and my radio filled with static. It's like a countdown, Sarah observed. Or a maze, each symbol building on the last one. At mile 3, we found Emma's backpack hanging from a branch. Her school ID was still in the front pocket, along with a note in her handwriting. I'm not lost, I'm finding myself. But it was what we found at mile 4 that told us we were getting close to something significant. The trees stopped, not gradually, as you'd expect at a natural clearing. They stopped like someone had drawn a line across the forest and declared, "Nothing grows beyond this point." We emerged from the dense canopy into a circular space roughly 100 yards across, completely bare of vegetation. The ground was hard-packed earth covered with symbols drawn in what looked like ash or chalk. At the center of the clearing stood a structure that definitely hadn't been there during any of my previous patrols of this area. It looked like a cross between a cabin and a temple, constructed entirely from materials that could have been harvested from the surrounding forest. Log walls chinked with moss and mud, but arranged in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. A roof made of interwoven branches that somehow formed impossible angles, creating an architecture that seemed to exist in more dimensions than my brain could process. Light flickered through gaps in the structure. Not the orange glow of fire, but something blue-white and cold. "That wasn't here yesterday," I whispered to Sarah. "How is that possible?" I'm beginning to think possible isn't the right word to use about any of this. As we approached the structure, voices became audible from inside, chanting in that same language I'd heard the night before, words that seemed to bypass my ears and speak directly to some primitive part of my brainstem. But underneath the chanting, I heard something that made me quicken my pace despite every instinct screaming at me to run. Emma's voice. Not the hollow, distant tone from the radio transmission, but her real voice. And she was crying. "Mom! Dad! Help me! I don't want this! I changed my mind!" Sarah started running toward the structure, but I caught her arm. "Wait," I hissed. "This could be a trap. Last night they knew things about us they shouldn't have known. They could be using her voice to lure us in." But as we crept closer to the structure, peering through gaps in the log walls, what I saw inside made my decision for me. Emma was there, but she wasn't the willing participant the cult leader had claimed she was. She was bound to a wooden post in the center of the structure, just as Jessica Williams had been. But this setup was far more elaborate. The entire interior of the building was arranged like an amphitheater, with Emma at the focal point and roughly 20 cult members arranged in concentric circles around her. 20, not 12. They'd grown in numbers overnight. And these weren't the same individuals I'd encountered before. Some looked like the original group, but others were clearly new, including several people I recognized. Madison Brooks, Emma's best friend from school. Tyler Chen, a kid from her art class. 3 adults I'd seen around town but couldn't name. All of them sitting motionless in the lotus position, eyes closed, symbols painted on their foreheads in the same ash-white substance that covered the clearing floor. "They're collecting people," Sarah whispered. "Building an army." The cult leader stood directly in front of Emma, holding the same ritual knife I'd wrestled away from him the night before, but now the blade glowed with that same blue-white light that flickered throughout the structure. "Emma O'Brien," he intoned, his voice carrying easily through the still air. "You came to us seeking escape from pain. But pain, as we have taught you, is not something to escape. It is something to embrace, to transform, to weaponize." Emma lifted her head, and I could see her face clearly for the first time. She looked older than her 16 years, but not in a good way. Her eyes were hollow, dark circles underneath them like she hadn't slept in days. The symbols painted on her forehead seemed to pulse with their own light. "I understand now," she said, but her voice was flat, emotionless. The depression wasn't a sickness. It was preparation. The anxiety wasn't a disorder. It was sensitivity. I can feel the thin places now. I can see through to the other side. And what do you see there, child? Emma's eyes rolled back in her head, showing only whites. When she spoke, her voice had that same echoing quality I'd heard from the eyeless woman. I see the old ones waiting. I see the barriers weakening. I see a world where pain becomes power, where isolation becomes connection, where the broken become the enlightened. The cult leader raised the knife. Then you are ready to complete the transformation, to become the key that opens the final door. Stop! I stepped out of the tree line, service weapon drawn. Sarah was right behind me, her own flashlight beam cutting through the supernatural glow inside the structure. Every head in the building turned toward us in perfect unison, creating one of the most unsettling sights I'd ever witnessed. 20 pairs of eyes, all focusing on us with the same expression of calm satisfaction. Ranger O'Brien, the cult leader said without lowering the knife, and Mrs. O'Brien, how wonderful that you've come to witness your daughter's ascension. Let her go, I said, keeping my weapon trained on him even though I'd already learned bullets were useless. Release all of them. Release them? He laughed. They came willingly, each one seeking something your modern world couldn't provide. Madison Brooks, struggling with an eating disorder and parents who thought therapy was weakness. Tyler Chen, questioning his sexuality in a family that would disown him for honesty. All of them in pain, all of them seeking answers, so you gave them false hope and indoctrinated them. I gave them truth, the truth that pain has purpose, that suffering can be transformed into strength, that the barriers between worlds can be crossed by those willing to pay the price. Emma's head snapped up, her eyes focusing on me with sudden clarity. Dad? Her voice was her own again, weak but undeniably real. Dad, I'm sorry. I thought they understood me, but they're making me do things, see things. I want to come home. Sarah pushed past me, heading straight for Emma despite the 20 cult members between them. Emma, we're here. We're going to get you out of this. But as Sarah reached the first circle of cult members, they stood in unison, blocking her path. Their eyes were completely black now. No whites, no irises, just dark pools that seemed to absorb light. You cannot interfere. They spoke in unison, their combined voices creating a sound like rushing water. The ritual has begun. The vessel has been prepared. The old one's hunger. The cult leader positioned the knife directly over Emma's heart. This is your last chance to join willingly, he said to Sarah and me. Become part of the transformation, or watch your daughter open the door alone. That's when I remembered something from my research at the library, something about the 1978 FBI raid. What happened to the 12 you lost in 1978? I called out, stalling for time while my mind raced through options. The cult leader paused, knife still raised. They were recycled, transformed. They became part of the structure itself. He gestured to the walls around us, and for the first time, I looked closely at the construction. What I'd taken for carefully arranged logs and branches revealed themselves to be something far more horrifying. The support beams weren't wood, they were bones, human bones, yellowed with age but still structurally sound. The walls weren't chinked with moss and mud, but with organic matter I didn't want to identify too closely. This entire building is made from previous rituals, Sarah whispered, her voice filled with horror. 41 years of preparation, the cult leader confirmed. And tonight it reaches completion. The gateway opens permanently. The old ones cross over, and your daughter becomes the first citizen of a new world order. The knife began its descent toward Emma's chest, but I'd been using the conversation to position myself, and Sarah, brilliant Sarah who knew me well enough to read my intentions without verbal communication, had been doing the same thing. I fired 3 rounds, not at the cult leader, but at the bone support beam directly above him. The ancient weathered bones shattered under the impact. A section of the impossible roof came crashing down, crushing the cult leader and sending the glowing knife skittering away across the floor. Simultaneously, Sarah tackled the nearest cult member, breaking their circle formation. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The blue-white light flickered and went out. The symbols on the walls stopped glowing, and every cult member in the building screamed in unison, a sound of pure anguish that seemed to come from somewhere much deeper than human vocal cords. "The structure is failing," Emma shouted, suddenly lucid. "Dad, the rope!" I rushed to her position, pulling out my utility knife to cut her restraints. But as I worked, I could feel the building beginning to collapse around us. Whatever supernatural forces had been holding it together were dissipating rapidly. "Everyone out!" I yelled. "Sarah, get the kids!" Sarah was already helping Madison and Tyler to their feet. The other cult members were writhing on the ground, the symbols on their foreheads fading like old tattoos. We made it out of the collapsing structure with seconds to spare. Behind us, the impossible architecture folded in on itself with a sound like breaking glass mixed with screaming wind. When the noise stopped, there was nothing left but a pile of ordinary bones and rotted wood. There's Chapter 9. The New Normal. The official report listed the incident as a structural collapse at an illegal campsite, with multiple persons requiring medical and psychological evaluation. 23 people were hospitalized, including Emma. Most had no memory of how they'd gotten to the Olympic Peninsula or what they'd been doing there. Emma remembered everything. The doctors called it shared psychotic episode brought on by hallucinogenic substances found at the site. The FBI classified it as domestic terrorism with ritualistic elements. The Park Service implemented new security protocols for the Ho River area, but I knew what really happened that night. We'd stopped something ancient and malevolent from using my daughter to open a doorway between worlds. We'd broken a cycle that had been repeating for over a century. We'd saved not just Emma, but potentially everyone who might have fallen under the cult's influence in the years to come. The cost, however, was significant. Emma spent 3 weeks in a psychiatric facility, working through what the doctors called trauma-induced dissociation. Sarah took a leave of absence from her job to be with her every day. I requested a transfer to a different national park, somewhere without thin places and ancient symbols carved into millennium-old trees. But the most important change was the simplest one. I started coming home at the end of my shift instead of finding excuses to work late. Sarah and I began going to couples counseling, dealing with years of accumulated distance and miscommunication. Emma started individual therapy, but she also started talking to us, really talking about her fears and dreams and the depression that had made her vulnerable to the cult's influence. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks. There were nights when Emma woke up screaming from nightmares about symbols and voices and the feeling of something vast and hungry pressing against the edges of reality. There were days when Sarah and I felt like strangers trying to rebuild a marriage from scratch, but we did the work. All of us, together. 6 months later, as I was finishing my last week at Olympic National Park before transferring to Yellowstone, I received a call that reminded me the story wasn't entirely over. "Ranger O'Brien, this is Agent Jennifer Martinez with the FBI. We need to talk." She met me at a coffee shop in Port Angeles, a serious woman in her 40s with the kind of eyes that had seen too much. "We've been monitoring unusual activity reports from national parks across the Pacific Northwest," she said without preamble. "Disappearances, strange symbols, reports of ritual activity that local authorities dismiss as drug-related incidents or mental health episodes." She slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were photographs from Mount Rainier, Mount Baker, and Crater Lake. All showed the same symbols I'd seen carved into the trees of Devil's Backbone. "The activity is spreading," Agent Martinez continued. "Whatever you interrupted that night, it wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of something larger, something that's been growing for decades." I closed the folder and pushed it back toward her. "Agent Martinez, I appreciate your concern, but I'm transferring to Yellowstone in 3 days. My family and I are moving on from this." "I understand. But if you change your mind, if you ever want to help us understand what you really encountered out there." She handed me a business card. "The official reports say you experienced shared hallucinations, but the evidence suggests something far more significant occurred." After she left, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, staring at her business card and thinking about cycles and patterns and the responsibility that comes with knowledge. When I got home, Sarah was helping Emma pack for college. She'd been accepted to the University of Washington's art program, a fresh start in a new city where no one knew about her 3 weeks in the psychiatric facility or her experience with the cult. "How did the meeting go?" Sarah asked. I told them about Agent Martinez, about the spreading symbols, about the suggestion that I could help with some kind of federal investigation. Emma stopped packing and looked at me seriously. "Dad, are you thinking about it, about helping them?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "Part of me thinks we've earned the right to a normal life, but another part of me wonders if we have a responsibility to prevent other families from going through what we went through." Emma sat down on her bed, considering. "The nightmares are getting better," she said finally. "The therapy is helping, but I still feel them sometimes. The thin places, like I can sense when reality is a little looser than it should be." "Emma, I'm not saying I want to go back to that life, but maybe what happened to us doesn't have to be just trauma. Maybe it can be preparation for helping other people who encounter things they don't understand." Sarah sat down next to Emma, taking her hand. "Whatever we decide," she said, "we decide together, as a family. No more going it alone." I looked at my wife and daughter, really looked at them the way I should have been doing for years, and realized that the most important transformation from our experience in Devil's Backbone wasn't stopping an ancient evil or breaking a supernatural cycle. It was learning that the real power to change the world starts with being present for the people you love. 3 months later, working as a ranger in Yellowstone and living in a small house where Emma visits on weekends and Sarah has started a new job she actually enjoys, I got a call from Agent Martinez. "Ranger O'Brien, we have a situation developing at Glacier National Park. Symbols appearing on trees. Reports of missing hikers. Local authorities are calling it drug-related, but..." I looked across the kitchen table where Sarah was grading papers and Emma was working on a sculpture for her art class. A piece she called Transformation that somehow managed to capture the idea of strength emerging from struggle. "Agent Martinez," I said, "let me call you back. I need to discuss this with my family. Because whatever came next, whatever thin places needed to be guarded or ancient evils needed to be stopped, we would face it the way we should have faced everything from the beginning. Together." My name is Kevin O'Brien, and I've learned that some stories don't really end. They just transform into new chapters. It's been 6 years since Devil's Backbone, and our lives have settled into what most people would consider normal. Emma graduated from UW with a degree in art therapy and now works with adolescents who've experienced trauma. Sarah became a school counselor, specializing in family crisis intervention. I transferred back to Olympic after 3 years in Yellowstone, because sometimes the best way to process difficult experiences is to return to where they happened and prove to yourself that you've grown stronger than the circumstances that once defined you. But twice a year, I get calls from Agent Martinez. The symbols have appeared in national parks from Alaska to Arizona. The pattern is always the same. Ancient markings appearing overnight on trees that have stood for centuries, followed by disappearances of vulnerable people seeking something the modern world can't provide. Each time, local authorities dismiss it as drug activity or mental health episodes. Each time, the FBI's X-Files style division gets involved. And each time, they ask for my help, not as a ranger, but as someone who's walked into the darkness and brought his family out intact. Sarah comes with me now on these consultations. Emma, when her schedule allows, provides insight into the psychological vulnerability that makes certain people susceptible to cult recruitment. We've become what Agent Martinez calls specialized consultants, a family unit that understands both the supernatural elements and the very human pain that feeds them. We've helped families in Oregon, Colorado, and Montana. We've prevented at least 4 major rituals from reaching completion. We've learned that the network we encountered at Devil's Backbone was just one node in a much larger web of connected groups, all drawing power from the same ancient sources. Most importantly, we've learned that the real victory isn't in stopping supernatural evil. It's in helping families recognize and address the ordinary human problems that make them vulnerable to extraordinary manipulation. The cult recruited Emma not because she was special, but because she was in pain and we weren't paying attention. They recruited Madison because her parents couldn't see past her eating disorder to the brilliant, sensitive girl underneath. They recruited Tyler because his family's conditional love left him desperate for unconditional acceptance. Evil, we've discovered, rarely has to work very hard to find victims. It just has to wait for pain to go unaddressed and isolation to go unnoticed. But love, real, present, attentive love, creates a barrier that even ancient malevolence struggles to cross. Tonight, as I finish writing this account on my laptop while Sarah reads beside me and Emma calls from Seattle to tell us about her newest client success story, I feel something I never expected when this all began. Gratitude. Not for the trauma, but for what the trauma taught us. Not for the supernatural encounter, but for the very human connections it forced us to rebuild. My radio sits silent on the desk beside my computer. No strange transmissions, no desperate voices calling from impossible coordinates. The symbols carved into the trees of Devil's Backbone faded years ago, leaving only normal scars that any casual hiker would dismiss as natural damage. But I keep the radio close because I've learned that sometimes the most important calls come when you least expect them. And sometimes, the best way to protect your family is to help other families protect themselves. My name is Kevin O'Brien. I'm a husband, a father, and a ranger who once walked into hell and brought everyone home. And if another family needs someone who understands that journey, I'm ready to answer the call. End. Author's note. This story explores themes of family dysfunction, adolescent vulnerability, and the way supernatural horror often serves as a metaphor for very real human problems. While the cult and supernatural elements are fictional, the underlying issues of family communication, parental presence, and adolescent mental health struggles are all too real. If you or someone you know is struggling with depression, family crisis, or thoughts of joining groups that promise easy answers to complex problems, please reach out to qualified mental health professionals, family counselors, or trusted community resources. The real monsters we face are usually the ones that feed on isolation, pain, and disconnection. The real magic that defeats them is love, attention, and the courage to do the difficult work of genuine human connection.